Good morning, everyone. I wasn't really feeling that good morning, but I will imagine that we will gain momentum as we consider God's word. I want to encourage you all to open up your Bibles to Matthew chapter 10. We'll be considering the last 20 verses 26 through 42, the last 16 verses in Matthew chapter 10. And as you note, as you turn there, you will note that this is actually picking up in the midst of a train of thought. And so I will just do a real quick reminder of what the previous verses were talking about, and I think it won't be very difficult to pick up the train of thought. So we saw that in the beginning of Matthew 10, in the first 25 verses of the chapter, that Christ gave his disciples a mission. Those that he had chose, he really enlisted them into this work of ministry. And there's a lot of great teaching there, and I wasn't here last week, but I imagine we really considered what it means to be a disciple, to be sent out into a community, into a context, into a culture, to proclaim that the kingdom is here. And there's a lot of responsibility attached to that. Now, we know, and Jesus gives us some clues about that when he did send his disciples out, that he's not sending them out into a context that is going to be conflict-free. He understood that he is sending them out, into a context where they could be rejected, where they could be scoffed at, where they could be persecuted. This is the context of the kingdom. And we understand even today that everyone who follows Jesus is going to live in perpetual conflict with the world and its systems. And I just want to remind everyone as we before we dive into the passage today, that Jesus promised us in John chapter 15, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you, I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid." And so as we consider our own, if we leave these doors today, whether you go to a restaurant or whether you have to stop off and pick up something at the grocery store, or whether you go to work on Monday or Tuesday, or whether you simply go into your community, if you have decided, if you have chosen to follow Jesus, you are going to enter into a point of conflict. And yet Christ has promised us, "I'm going to give you a peace internally that no outward conflict can ever match up with. I'm going to give you the stability and the peace in your heart that you will have everything you need to deal with the conflict that you're going to experience when you go out into the culture." Let's read our text together, Matthew 10, beginning with verse 26. "So do not be afraid of them. For there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. And anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Anyone who welcomes you welcomes me, And anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones who is my disciple, truly I tell you, that person will certainly not lose their reward. The title of the message this morning is A Time for Choosing. A Time for Choosing. And we as believers and even as unbelievers or as seekers of those who are not sure yet about Jesus, we are often brought into a decision point in our life, and I believe that this morning is one of those points just by God's providence that he brought you here to hear this word, that you are brought into a time of choosing. And I believe we will have to choose, and we'll have to choose again after that and after that and after that, because discipleship is a continual choosing. Jesus lays out here 3 spheres of life where we must continually choose to follow him. And so we're going to explore what that means for us, these 3 things, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that would mean for us moving forward. He talks about the choice between fearing God or fearing men, or between seeking worldly approval or godly approval. I think that those 2 things are linked, so I have linked them together. So that's one choice every disciple needs to consider and make continually. Who am I here to please? The second choice, and this is a really tough teaching, and we'll try to, I think, put it in context of what Jesus is telling us here. Sometimes we have to choose between God and our family. It's a tough one. And then the third thing is we have to choose between pursuing our own mission or the mission Jesus gives us. It's important to remember that Jesus calls people to follow him, but he has not conscripted anyone. He has not forced you into service out of coercion or fear. Hopefully you've been drawn to him this morning just by the sheer beauty of who he is and your love for him and understanding his love for you. But the choosing is part of the discipleship. I want to put this in my own context because I was really moved by this passage. This passage, when I was first considering becoming a believer, caused me a lot of problems. There's a couple of verses that I want to highlight a little bit later on where I'll talk about that. But I entered the faith as a 19-year-old. I'd already had 2 years of college under my belt, and so I was a junior in college. I really gave my life to the Lord and really submitted to him in the summer between my sophomore and my junior years of college. And when I entered college as a junior, as a new Christian, I knew that every day that I got up and went to class, that I was entering the arena. That I wasn't going to be welcomed as a believer, that there were going to be ideas and there were going to be people who would look down on me, think I was kind of dumb or backwards, or frankly, that thought I was misguided. And I think some of you have probably also had that experience. Whatever sphere that you've been in life, for some of you, maybe it was college, or maybe it was high school, or even elementary or middle school. For some of you, it could be the workplace. But you get up every day knowing that you're going to enter in a context where you're in the arena. There's a spiritual battle happening. There aren't going to be people there that are going to sort of pat you on the back for being a Christian or encourage you in your walk. There's not going to be scriptural principles held up as the pinnacle of truth. And so knowing that, my experience was it actually made me what I would consider to be a very dedicated and committed person, disciple, because I knew that each day was going to be a challenge. And in that challenge as a new Christian, and I'm going to talk a little bit later about one of my failures, because I'm not going to tell you that I was a mature Christian or that I got everything right. But I do look fondly back at that time when I was spiritually sharpened, because I learned that the peace of God was more precious to me than acceptance from my professors or my peers. And I just want to encourage everyone, if you really feel like you're stepping into the battle when you leave this church or you leave your home, and you feel like it's a grind to be facing opposition like this all the time. The Lord Jesus is right there with you. And you will learn more about your peace with him and his love for you. And there's some encouragement even in this passage about that. I wish I could say that in subsequent years, after I left college, that I always made the right choices, but I can't say that. All that stuff is behind me now. And whatever other failures that you or I have had in trusting Christ more, all of that stuff is behind us too. The only thing we can look to today is the choices we make moving forward. So the three spheres of life, it's hard to say that, the three spheres of life, we'll take them one by one, and we'll examine how these become pressures, cultural pressures upon us, and how we should think about them as we choose to follow Jesus. Let's talk about the first one, the choice between God or men. Well, it seems like a no-brainer. But what Jesus is talking about here is fear. And fear is legitimate. Wolf and I were just talking before the services, before Bible class this morning. You know, you look at the news, you see places like Nigeria where there are Christians being killed for being Christians, and that is a legitimate fear. Who's going to come into my house today, knock on my door, and yank me out and have me killed? Or show up at my church where I'm worshiping and have me killed? That is something that would instill fear. In Isaiah chapter 8, verses 12 and 13, the prophet says, "Do not call conspiracy everything this people calls a conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, and do not dread it. The Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy. He is the one you are to fear. He is the one that you are to dread." It is easy to fear people who have the ability to punish us. At times, it is wise to do so. Romans chapter 13 tells us that we should have a healthy respect for those who have been ordained in civil government to have authority over us. But what Jesus is talking about here and what God is teaching us in Isaiah is that there's an unhealthy fear. There is an unhealthy respect. Just because someone has a gun or a missile or a sword, you can't compromise what you believe and who you believe Jesus is because of that. Your faith has to be stronger. Your faith has to be mightier than whatever it is human beings can threaten to do to you. And you might say, well, that's easy for you to say. It's not easy for me to say. I've never had to experience the level of threat that some believers have had to experience over the course of history and even now today. The kingdom is at stake, Jesus is saying. You can't be fearful of people who would threaten your life. When we grow to know and love God more, we become less fearful of what men can do to us. So this is not a no-fear lecture. What I'm telling you is the natural response to legitimate threats is fear. What I am telling you is if you grow in your discipleship and you grow in your faith in God and you grow in your spiritual maturity, the love and the peace of God overshadows the fear that you might experience initially or instinctually. We grow to love God more, we become less fearful. The Bible says perfect love casts out fear. What can men do to me? What can they do to me? Can they fire me? Yes. Can they make fun of me? Yes. Can they reject me? Yes. Can they call me names? Yes. Can they kill me? Yes, they can. But I will not be afraid. That's the choice we make. It's a time for choosing. Just want to talk a little bit more about Isaiah here. I don't know what conspiracies were rampant in Isaiah's time as a prophet. There are some conspiracies rampant now, are they not? We get exposed to them in a lot of different ways. They're flying all over the internet. Who are these aliens? What are unidentified flying objects? I mean, you can go down the list. There's a litany that I couldn't even begin to enumerate. There's a lot of things that we could be fearful about, is what I'm saying, legitimate or illegitimate. But as we grow to love God, the conspiracies just stay that. And God says, I'm the Holy One. I'm the one you are to fear. I'm the one you are to dread. Why? Because God, as Jesus points out here in this passage, holds eternity in the balance. Well, that sounds pretty rough. That's some heavy stuff. But Jesus offers us a picture so that his disciples, and by extension, so that we don't get discouraged. Verse 29. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. The God who knows me will not forsake my soul. I don't think anybody's bought a sparrow this week. I don't even know what a sparrow goes for. So think whatever small transaction you make in your life. You know, you go to, well, I was going to say buying gasoline. That's not a small transaction anymore. You go to the store and you pick up a gallon of milk. Does God know that you bought a gallon of milk? Yes, he does. He knows every detail, every aspect of your life. Jesus is reinforcing that the reason why you don't need to be afraid is because the holy God who holds eternity in the balance knows everything about you. He knows you intimately, and he has you covered. That's the choice we make when we put our faith in God, is we choose to believe that. Even a bird that's worth a penny, God watches them. God knows what's going on. He's not oblivious. He's not dispassionate about it. He has a deep and abiding, sincere concern about you. Jesus instructs us to share without fear of reprisal the things we learn in the secret place with the Lord. Jesus says, I'm going to whisper some things in your ear. I'm going to tell you some things just among us. And you don't have to be afraid to go out and tell other people about them, because I have you covered. God knows you. He's going to watch over you. He's going to be your fortress. And so we have a responsibility. Your own devotional life, your own time spent with God is meant for your spiritual nourishment. It's between you and God, these secrets, the things that he whispers to you, the things he teaches you and tells you. And as he speaks to you through these scriptures, and as you seek him out in prayer, what he's doing is he is building within you a mighty fortress of truth and spiritual strength. So what we're learning here is the truths of God, who God is, and how he sees human beings, and the work that he wants to do in my life and your life. Those things are personal. But Jesus is saying they start out personal, they start out as whispers or as secrets, but then they become transformational and it becomes public. And you don't need to worry about talking about those things in public, because I have you covered. And so what we see here is acknowledging God is a lifestyle. It's not a one-time victory or a one-time failure. We are not defined by those things. I'm going to tell you now about those verses that almost kept me from becoming a Christian. Look at verse 32 and verse 33 again. I'm going to read them now. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. Now, if that doesn't send a chill down your spine, then you ain't doing it right. Why did this cause me so much trouble? Well, when I was considering the gospel and whether or not I was going to choose my own way or submit myself to Christ, these verses bothered me because I knew I was a very shy person. I didn't like to inject myself into a conversation. I'm not good at conversation starters. I will sit in awkward silence with a stranger before I say anything. And I knew that that kind of aspect of my personality was going to create some problems. I had to acknowledge the Lord before others, or he wasn't going to acknowledge me, and that was a very fearful thing for me in my unregenerate state. I didn't trust Christ that he could change my heart in that way. And perhaps you have found yourself at some point in your life, I would imagine it's a relatively universal experience, that there was a time where you should have said something and you kept your mouth shut. I'm going to share an experience, again, from my college years that I want to use as an illustration to highlight why this is a time for choosing for us. I was a relatively new believer, and I was sitting in a kind of a conference room with two other young men at college, and they were having a conversation. I was in there studying. I wasn't really a part. I didn't know them very well. I knew their names. And I was sitting there reading, studying, taking notes, but also kind of listening. And these two were spending the conversation. It went on for a while, too. And what they were doing was they were making fun of another Christian that they had just had a conversation with. And I didn't know that person very well either. I was just relatively new, again, new to the school and only been there about a month. And they're just ripping this guy up one side and down the other and making fun of, they were asking him all these kind of stupid questions about what he believed, and they were making fun of his answers. And the whole time I just sat there and pretend like I didn't hear any of it. And I didn't stand up for that person. I didn't stand up for Christ. I just sat there. And of course, it would have been awkward. I wasn't really in the conversation to say, hey, you guys, just to let you know, I also believe that. I believe that we're saved by grace and not by works. I believe that God is in heaven and that he is holy. I believe there's a heaven and a hell. So if you're making fun of that guy, you also should make fun of me. I didn't say anything. I just sat there. Have you ever had an experience like that? Where you knew you were feeling prompted that this was a time for choosing and you chose to opt out? I don't know, maybe you guys are always 100% on that kind of stuff. If you are, I applaud you. That's really a testimony. I want you to think for a moment about Peter's example. Peter, before he was an apostle, was known for denying Christ. His legacy, if Jesus hadn't restored him, was to be the guy who denied Jesus 3 times at the time when Jesus needed him most. How do you live with that amount of failure in your life? Well, you really can't. And so Jesus made a point, if you read the end of the book of John, to restore him, to give him reassurance that he would be with him and that he had a mission still for Peter, even though he failed. And so I just want to encourage you with these verses that if you're feeling convicted about a past failure right now, about acknowledging Christ, you're kind of missing the point of what Jesus is saying. So, yes, it is good to feel convicted or to recognize conviction when we have fallen short of what Christ has called us to do. But what's most important is to develop a conviction about what you're going to do next. See, convictions after the fact, they are somewhat helpful, they are instructive. What is most effective is the convictions we develop moving forward. So, moving forward, I am going to speak up for Christ because I want him to speak up for me. My salvation is not contingent upon how many times I speak up for him. Again, I want to point to this is a lifestyle. A life in Jesus is going to transform us so that at some point we're going to reach where, and now I can say, I think honestly, if that same conversation were happening now, I wouldn't have let it last very long before I would have said, hey, guys, here's what my perspective is on this. You're talking about me. You're talking about my Lord. Just FYI. The second conflict that we run into, and Jesus addresses this, sometimes is even in our own family. And there are people, even in this room, who maybe have had this experience. There are some Christians, some disciples of Christ who live in families, and those families have set themselves up against Christ. Or they're living in disobedience to Christ. Maybe they were Christians at some point, but they've drifted from the faith. Or maybe there's a whole range of potential pitfalls that might happen within a family. Families are often complicated. And Jesus says, you have to look to me first. And this is sometimes people are called out of families that are very, very, I guess the word I would say is they're very antagonistic towards the gospel. And as I talk to people, especially in other countries, who have had to leave their families or their families asked them to leave or forced them to leave because they became Christians, it becomes all too apparent to me that the family structure designed by God can be corrupted by Satan, and it can be used as a leverage point to keep people from choosing Christ. Oh, that would not happen in this fellowship. I pray that it doesn't happen writ large, But we all have to acknowledge that family can be a very powerful motivator. And it's not just someone kicking you out of your house because you become a Christian. Maybe they look down on you because you are on fire for the Lord, or maybe they think you're a little too into it, or maybe, there's differing interpretations about how to do things. There's a whole range of things where family might be a roadblock to following Jesus. And I want to say that one of the beautiful things about the church, and this is what some of those believers who have been kicked out of their families for following Christ, what they've learned is that church becomes their family. God has developed a family. God has built a family. Christ is the head that they can go to when even their closest blood relatives forsake them. That is one of the beauties of the church. It's also possible for Christians to do this to themselves. And there are some teachings out there that really elevate the family above Christ. And they probably wouldn't say it that way, but I just want to caution everyone that as families, marriages, and children, that is a God-ordained institution. It's God's idea, not ours. But the intent was never to lift up the family dynamic above what Jesus is calling us to do. And that's something that Christians also should evaluate in their own life when they're choosing, where are my priorities? What's my perspective? Are you putting all your eggs into the family basket and not listening to the secret things that Christ wants to reveal to you? Are you elevating your family as the end-all, be-all of all of your time and attention without thinking about, and Christ is not going to ask you to forsake your family, except, we see the exception here, if your family is asking you to go against him. Sometimes a man will go against his father, a daughter will go against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemy will be members of his own household. It's a hard teaching, but if you pay attention at all, you see that this is true. The last conflict is simply choosing between God or me. And this conflict is woven throughout the fabric of our culture. Jesus himself said, whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. I have encountered this attitude, either implicitly or explicitly sometimes. I will be a Christian and follow Jesus as long as it benefits me. The second it stops benefiting me, I am moving on to something else. When people walk away from the faith or deny Christ or both, they can do it for many reasons. What I have found is that most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, it's because of some moral or philosophical preference that they treasure more than Jesus. They no longer want to trust him. Sometimes people leave Jesus to pursue sinful relationships. They leave him because the way seems too hard. They're tired of the conflict with the world. They'd rather compromise. They're weary. They're tired. Some people leave him because they become disillusioned with the church. Some are disappointed with how their lives have turned out. Some see evil and suffering in the world, and they no longer trust God's providence. Mostly they want things to just go their way, and they're spiritually hurt inside. And that is a tough impulse to check in our society, because our society now often prioritizes our feelings over the truth. And Jesus is not disturbed by any of this. He's not surprised by any of this. It has not caught him off guard. And he is still here calling us to trust him in faith and follow him. It always still is a time for choosing, even for those who have drifted, those who are disillusioned, those who have lost heart. Christ is still sitting at the door, waiting for you to open up. It's tough sometimes for us to step into the arena knowing that these are the conflicts that we will sometimes face. It feels like the world is against us. Sometimes it feels like our own family is against us. And even with my own spirit, sometimes I don't have the love and the care and the concern and the compassion and ultimately the submission that I should have. But today, like every day, is a time for choosing. When the Apostle Paul said that he died daily, I'm starting to learn, I think, more deeply than I ever have before, what he meant by that. The daily choosing to follow Jesus has its intrinsic, special, and deep rewards, but we cannot pretend like there won't be conflict. So, what is my mission? These last few verses of the text today are extremely encouraging. And I don't know if you've thought about them lately, but I would ask you in closing that you think about them now. What is the mission? Well, clearly, some people are sent out. And what I mean by sent out, I mean not just to their communities or to their locales, but people are sent as missionaries or as prophets, evangelists, preachers. These are people who have a public-facing ministry that is maybe goes beyond what all people can do where they are in life right now. But Jesus says, don't worry about that. Don't focus on the limitations that you might feel. So you're asking yourself, well, I do still want to follow Jesus. I want to choose him today. If it's a time for choosing, I'm choosing Jesus. I believe most of us, if not all of us, have that inclination of heart. So what is it then that we are doing? What are we called to do? Jesus mentioned specifically service, hospitality, and fellowship. I want you to pay attention to what happens when we welcome a prophet. Verse 41. Whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. Whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. You say to yourself, well, I can't climb up on a podium and preach a message. I can't go out into the community or across the globe and give a prophetic message proclaiming the gospel to the nations. I'm not equipped for that. I'm not gifted in that way. And Jesus says, can you welcome that person? Can you support that person? Can you help that person? Can you pray for that person? Can you give so that person can do that? If so, you receive their reward. Those aren't my words, those are Jesus's. Well, but how simple can it be? How low can the service go? How minimal is the sacrifice that I have to make? How about a cup of cold water? Can we handle that? Is that within our realm of possibility as a disciple when we choose Jesus? Now, we are blessed in this country. A cup of cold water doesn't require a great deal of sacrifice. I don't have to travel to a well. I don't have to put my bucket down. I go to my tap, or I go to my refrigerator. Service, hospitality, fellowship. Choosing Jesus means our mission becomes welcoming and supporting each of us as we work in the kingdom. So when you engage in these things, you are choosing Christ as you embrace the path that he has for you in his church. Again, I would ask the question, does everyone in here currently have the ability to give a cup of cold water to someone who is doing the Lord's work? Does anyone have the ability to go even beyond that, to give 2 cups of water or a cup of coffee, or to set up chairs in the back, or to set up tables in the back, or to sign up for a Sunday lunch, or to give a call to someone who you know might be struggling, or to go visit someone when you have some time on your hands, or to look around a church and see that how you can pitch in some way maybe that you hadn't considered before? That would be the equivalent in terms of sacrifice as a cup of cold water. That is your standard. And you might think to yourself, well, a cup of cold water, like Jesus, that's a pretty low bar. I think we can all get over that. The sad truth is, and I think Jesus knew that some people won't even be willing to get over that bar. Why? Conflict with the world, conflict with family, conflict with themselves. So I would ask today that you think about your own choosing and how you even serve this church. I would challenge you to think about what the cup of cold water might be for you. And you don't have to think about, well, what's in it for me if I do that? Jesus already said, your reward is there. If that's something that you've questioned in your heart, it feels like nobody's paying attention, or this is a thankless job, or I'm spending a lot of time doing this and I'm not seeing any real proceeds or fruits from the thing that I'm doing. I feel like my service is unappreciated or nobody cares about it. And sometimes those are real things. Like, I want to acknowledge that can feel legitimate. But Jesus says, if you trust me, your heavenly Father sees that. He will reward you with a prophet's reward, with a righteous person's reward. He sees it. He knows it. He wants to lavish you with those things. So I pray today, in closing, that as we have been really challenged by the words of Jesus here to choose him and to reject the fear that we might have of the conflict that we would face out in the world, that we would also embrace the mission that he's given us, that we would rejoice in it, that we would find new blessing in it, that it would be the fuel for our fire, that it would move us to be excited about even the smaller things in life, that we feel like maybe other people don't notice, but we know that our Father in heaven does. I pray that God blesses his word this morning.